Tonight we'll journey through the island where evolution went insane, a place where animals seem to skip the memo about normal survival rules, and instead wrote their own bizarre playbook. Think of it as nature's experimental kitchen, except instead of a new soup recipe, you got a giant bird that kicks like a horse. Now, before we begin, let me know where you're tuning in from. And if you're new here, know that this video is designed to help you relax or even fall asleep while your subconscious drifts back in time to an island where strange creatures ruled without apology. The idea of an island is always a little strange, cut off from the rest of the world, surrounded by endless water that keeps everything inside trapped, or maybe protected, depending on how you look at it. Islands act like laboratories for life. When a species arrives there, it has nowhere else to go. So it adapts in weird and often extreme ways. You might picture this in your own kitchen, where if you only had beans and rice, you would find 10 new ways to cook beans and rice. That is basically what nature does with an island. It works with what it has, and the results often surprise us. Have you ever noticed how something familiar can turn unsettling just by scale? A house cat looks cute, but if one walked in the room the size of a car, the cuteness would end quickly. Islands show us this trick over and over. Small things get big, big things shrink, and everything ends up looking slightly wrong to our usual sense of balance. Scientists call this island gigantism and island dwarfism, but you do not need the names to see the effect. It is like turning a dial up or down on the shapes of life, testing what happens when rules stretch too far. South America in the distant past was one giant stage for these experiments. For tens of millions of years, it was isolated from the rest of the continents, drifting along like a raft that had slipped from the dock. That isolation was a gift to weirdness, because creatures there did not face the same rivals or predators as elsewhere. They filled roles in odd ways, and the result was a menagerie that feels like a fever dream. Imagine a whole world where lions never existed, so birds became the lions instead. That was South America. The most famous actors were the terror birds, called phorusrhacids if you want the official tag. They were enormous, flightless birds, taller than a person, with heads like battle axes. They could sprint across the plains, and when they struck with that heavy beak, it was like a hammer slamming down. If you have ever been nipped by a goose, you already know birds do not need size to be intimidating. Now picture a goose that could knock you flat in a single blow. It almost feels funny until you remember it was real. Their wings were stubs, useless for flight, but you get the sense they did not care. Who needs wings when you can run faster than anything around you? It is the kind of design choice nature sometimes makes, trimming the things you do not need and pushing the things you do. Humans still joke about flightless birds today, but millions of years ago, the joke was on the mammals who had to dodge these feathered sledgehammers. Yet terror birds were not alone. The land was thick with giant herbivores too, the ground sloths, for instance, ancestors of the slow tree hangers you know today. But these were nothing like the gentle little climbers. Some weighed as much as elephants. They lumbered slowly, but with strength enough to tear trees down. Their claws were long and heavy, not for hunting, but for pulling branches and defending themselves. You might call them peaceful giants. though if you stood too close, those claws could still open you like a sack. Imagine parking a forklift in the forest and then giving it fur and hunger. That was the ground sloth, though calling them sloths feels almost unfair, since they were not slow little tree huggers like today's species. Some were the size of elephants, lumbering across plains and tearing down entire trees to eat. Have you ever tried to picture a sloth but scaled up like a construction vehicle? It takes away the cozy charm pretty fast. They were slow compared to predators, but their size alone gave them confidence. And claws the length of your hand meant few creatures bothered picking a fight. Think of them as living forklifts, designed to move plant life from upright to horizontal in very slow motion. The mix of creatures made South America feel like a dream where someone shuffled the deck of life. Birds in the role of lions, sloths in the role of bulldozers, rodents so big they made modern guinea pigs look like toys. And then there were armadillos the size of Volkswagens, rolling fortresses that could shrug off most attacks. Can you imagine walking up to an armadillo today and then multiplying it until it is as wide as your car? The funny part is, they probably moved just as slowly as their small cousins. So you would watch this giant armored thing trundle across the land, unstoppable not because of speed, but because there was nothing you could do about it. And then there were armadillos, except calling them armadillos almost feels misleading. These were glyptodonts, armored tanks of the ancient world, as wide as cars, with shells like concrete. They rolled through the landscape at their own pace because nothing could stop them. Even the terror birds must have hesitated before pecking one. If you have ever tried tapping a bowling ball with your fingernail, you know the feeling of futility. That was what most predators saw when they looked at a glyptodont. Do you notice the pattern here? South America felt like nature was trying out costumes, handing bird suits to predators, handing tank suits to herbivores, and letting the mammals fill in the spaces left over. Rodents grew to the size of cattle, and even crocodiles tried new tricks, some turning into land-stalking monsters instead of river dwellers. You could walk 1 mile in that land and feel like you had crossed 3 different worlds. Now let me ask you this. If you lived back then, what would scare you more? A sprinting bird with a skull that could crack yours, or a slow-moving sloth the size of a bus? Both were real threats, but in very different ways. One was speed and precision. The other was sheer size and force. It reminds you that survival has no single recipe, just whatever works until it stops working. The funny part is, for millions of years, these creatures ruled without challenge. The terror birds in particular had no real rivals. They were the apex hunters by default. Yet their reign shows us something strange about power. It often lasts longer when no one tests it. As soon as the land bridges opened between continents, everything shifted. North American predators came down, cats and dogs and bears, and the terror birds slowly lost their place. You could say they went from top billing to side character until the show ended completely. But hold that thought, because for now, in this first walk through the island continent, they were kings. You might even picture yourself sitting at a safe distance, watching one strut across the plains, its shadow long and sharp, its stride confident. Do you feel a chill thinking about that? Maybe you also feel a bit of awe, the kind you get when you see something that is both absurd and terrifying. Have you ever been at a zoo and stared at a bird enclosure, then noticed how the bird suddenly fixes its eyes on you? There is a moment when you feel small, even though you know you are safe behind glass. Terror birds gave that same feeling, only with no glass and no guarantee of safety. It is easy to laugh about them now, when they are bones in a museum, but if they walked your neighborhood, you would never leave the house without a stick. That is the strange charm of South America's ancient ecosystem. It forces you to imagine a world where familiar shapes twist into new roles, and every step on the ground feels like walking into someone else's experiment. And maybe that is why islands draw our imagination so much. They are contained worlds where life is free to bend without the constant interruptions of the mainland. So as we drift deeper into this story, keep that image with you. A land cut off, playing by its own rules, producing birds that became wolves, sloths that became giants, and armored creatures that rolled like living cars. It was not chaos, it was balance. Just a balance that looks upside down to us. And that balance would hold for ages until the doors opened again and new rivals arrived. But for now, let us keep wandering across this ancient island where every step revealed something stranger than the last. When you step back into that ancient South American world, the first thing to notice is how the land itself shaped the story. Isolation does not just change animals, it changes entire systems of survival. Think about what it means to be locked away for millions of years. No outside influences coming in, no predators crossing over, no new plants or insects drifting in. Over time, the whole place becomes a closed recipe, stewing in its own flavors. It is like leaving a pot on the stove with the lid sealed. Eventually, everything inside takes on the same deep taste. That is exactly what South America did during its long separation. The terror birds were not the only predators to thrive in this isolation. There were also monstrous crocodiles that left the water behind, walking the land with legs longer than you might imagine for a reptile. One of them was Sebacus, a crocodile that did not bother lurking in rivers, but instead stalked like a cat across the plains. If the word crocodile makes you think of lazy sunbathers on muddy banks, then this animal forces a correction. It was fast, active, and built for ambush. Have you ever walked across a patch of tall grass and felt like eyes might be on you? That was the feeling for small mammals who lived under the gaze of Sebacus. And yet, the mammals were not helpless. Some of them grew to absurd sizes, using mass as their main defense. Consider the capybara of today, a friendly-looking rodent that often lounges near water. Now imagine its ancient cousin, Joseph Oartigazea, which grew as large as a bull. A rodent that size does not need to scurry. It simply walks, and everything else gives it space. Picture yourself seeing a rat in your kitchen. Now stretch that rat to fill your driveway. Would you call an exterminator Or would you just hand over the keys and move out? Rodents, this large, remind us that survival is not always about teeth and claws. Sometimes being too big to mess with is enough. And in a land where predators were birds instead of cats, size bought safety. The terror birds may have been fierce, but even they thought twice before attacking something as heavy as a cow-sized rodent. Imagine trying to mug someone twice your weight. It quickly becomes a bad idea. But size was not the only trick on the island continent. Some creatures shrank instead of growing. Horses, for example, when they reached South America, evolved into much smaller forms. You might expect horses to stay majestic and tall, yet the lack of open grasslands and the shortage of predators meant they shrank down. A smaller horse eats less, needs less space, and can hide more easily in dense forests. It is the same logic you might use when moving into a small apartment. You get rid of the giant furniture and learn to live compact. Evolution did the same thing with horses. The forests themselves played a big role in this reshaping. Dense canopies meant light was limited, and plants had to compete hard to reach the sun. That in turn changed the diets of the animals, which shaped their bodies. It is funny how one detail leads to another. The trees grow tall, the plants on the ground adapt, the herbivores change their eating style, and predators adjust their hunting patterns. Have you ever tugged at one thread on a sweater and watched the whole thing loosen? That is what ecosystems do. Pull one piece and everything shifts. And in South America's case, the shifts went in directions no one could predict. Ground sloths, for example, did not just grow large, they spread into many forms, some grazing, some climbing, some even venturing into water. One genus called Thalassocnus became semi-aquatic, feeding in the ocean shallows. If you think of sloths as slow tree huggers, the idea of one swimming with the grace of a sea cow feels absurd, yet fossils prove it. Imagine lying on a beach, and instead of a seal, you see a shaggy sloth drifting by like a furry canoe. It sounds like a cartoon, but it was real. That is another reminder of how isolation bends logic. Without competition from true sea mammals in that region, sloths just took the role instead. If no one else is eating the plants in the shallow water, then why not a sloth? You might see the same thing in your own life. When nobody volunteers for a boring job, eventually someone unexpected steps up. Evolution has no shame in filling gaps with the strangest candidates. Do you see the rhythm here? Birds becoming wolves, rodents becoming cattle, sloths becoming whales. The entire land was a carnival of role reversals, and yet each reversal made sense in its context. That is the paradox of islands. They look insane from the outside, but perfectly normal from within. Have you ever walked into a household that lives by odd rules? Shoes in the fridge, books stacked in the bathroom, and everyone there acts like it is normal. That was South America. Another oddity was the marsupials. While most people think of marsupials as kangaroos or koalas in Australia, South America had its own set. These creatures carried their young in pouches, and some evolved into predators themselves. Thylacosmolus, for instance. a marsupial saber-tooth with massive curved canines. At first glance, you would swear it was related to the saber-toothed cat from North America, but it was not. Two completely separate lineages, yet both produced saber teeth. That is convergent evolution, when different families invent the same solution. Think of two people on opposite sides of the world, both inventing umbrellas, different materials, same idea. Now ask yourself, why the long teeth? Saber teeth look flashy, but they were built for precision killing, slicing into prey rather than crushing. Thylacosmilus had weaker jaws than cats, but those long canines did the work. It almost feels like a specialist tool, less like a hammer and more like a scalpel. Have you ever struggled to open packaging with your hands and then reached for scissors? That was the saber-tooth advantage. You might wonder how such creatures coexisted with terror birds. The answer is, not easily. They likely avoided each other when possible, much like modern predators do. Even lions and hyenas rarely fight head-on because both risk injury. The same logic applied here. A terror bird with a broken leg could not hunt, and a saber-tooth with cracked teeth could not eat. So each kept to their style. Birds striking with speed, marsupials with precision, and beneath them all, the herbivores carried on in slow rhythm, glyptodonts grazing with their armor glinting in the sun, giant sloths moving tree to tree like living excavators, rodents chewing plants with the patience of monks. It was not a chaotic land despite the strangeness. It was balanced, a system that worked for millions of years. Let me pause to ask you something. Do you find it strange how balance can exist in something that looks bizarre from the outside? We tend to think of order as neat and symmetrical, yet here was a world of giant rats and bird predators, and it worked smoother than you might expect. Maybe that says something about our own sense of what normal means. Picture for a moment a human ancestor stumbling into this land. Our early relatives in North America and Africa faced lions and leopards, but here they would meet a sprinting bird. Imagine the confusion on their faces, expecting fur, but seeing feathers instead. It is a reminder that survival is always local. What seems terrifying in one place may be absent in another. You might fear snakes in one region, but find none when you travel far enough. South America was simply playing by its own deck of cards, and those cards kept flipping new surprises. Consider the giant turtles, some stretching nearly 3 meters across their shells. You could walk behind one and use it as a shield. Or the Macrauchenia, a strange camel-like mammal with a trunk-like nose. Looking at its fossils today, paleontologists still debate exactly what it was related to. To the casual eye, it looks like a camel that borrowed an elephant's nose, stitched together in a hurry. Have you ever seen a child's drawing of an animal where features are scrambled? That is how Macrauchenia feels. The longer you list the creatures, the more it sounds like fiction. And yet each one had a purpose, each one slotted into the web. That is the quiet beauty of evolution on an island continent. It may look insane, but it never wastes space. Every role is filled, every niche occupied. If a tree falls, someone eats it. If a carcass lies, someone scavenges it. It is a closed system that leaves little unused, like an efficient household where leftovers always become tomorrow's lunch. This closed loop lasted so long that when outsiders finally arrived, the system could not handle them. North America eventually connected to South America through the Isthmus of Panama. Suddenly, the doors opened, and the insulated world was flooded with new competitors: dogs, cats, bears, and many others came south. You can imagine what happened next. The terror birds lost ground. The marsupial saber-tooth lost out to true cats, and many of the giants began to disappear. But that is a story for later in our journey. For now we stay in the moment when isolation still held, when the island continent was still fully itself. If you close your eyes, you might hear the sounds. Heavy footsteps of sloths dragging across the forest floor, the scraping of glyptodonts pushing through brush, the sudden thundering sprint of a terror bird chasing some unlucky prey, and the silence afterward, broken only by the wind across endless plains. It is a world that feels both alive and haunting. So let us linger here a while longer. Imagine yourself walking at dusk, the sky painted orange, shadows stretching long. You hear rustling and look. A giant rodent chewing calmly, unbothered by your presence. You turn the other way and see a bird standing tall, its beak glinting in the fading light. You freeze, but it does not attack. It simply watches you. In that moment, you know you are not in charge here. You are simply another visitor on an island where evolution went insane, and where the rules you know no longer matter. The land we have been walking through already feels full of impossibilities, yet the deeper you go into South America's past, the more strange faces appear from the shadows. It is almost like opening a series of doors in an old hallway, each new room stranger than the last. And every time you think you have reached the end, another handle waits ahead. The island continent kept producing experiments, and each one leaves you shaking your head softly in disbelief. One of the more puzzling creatures was Toxodon. Imagine a hippo, then stretch its skull into a shape that looks slightly like a rodent, and give it teeth better suited to grazing than chewing meat. It was a stocky, heavy beast, standing chest high to a man, built with a body that looked both familiar and wrong at once. Darwin himself once stared at its bones and admitted he could not quite place what family it belonged to. Have you ever picked up a tool at home and felt unsure if it was a hammer or a wrench? That same confusion followed Toxodon. What made it thrive was its ability to eat nearly anything green: grasses, shrubs, water plants. It was not picky. That flexibility gave it a wide reach, much like a person who can cook 10 different meals from the same 3 ingredients. Specialists might starve when conditions shift, but generalists carry on. Toxodon filled that generalist role with confidence, wandering wetlands and plains alike. You can picture them standing half-submerged like hippos, only without the same grumpy charm. Sharing the land with Toxodon were Macrochinia, those odd camel-like creatures with trunked noses. Their necks were long, their bodies horse-like, and their snouts dangled like short hoses. The design looked clumsy, yet it worked. That trunk allowed them to graze low plants without bending fully, and also to browse higher leaves without awkward stretching. It is the kind of feature that looks silly to us until you think about convenience. Have you ever carried groceries in a way that looked ridiculous but worked perfectly for balance? That was Macrauchenia's trunk. What makes both Toxodon and Macrauchenia striking is how they show the independence of South America's path. While the rest of the world filled with horses, camels, and antelopes, this land made its own large herbivores from unrelated stock. It proves again that evolution cares little about design consistency. It only cares about what survives. If two continents face the same needs, they might invent similar answers, but from totally different starting points. It is like two chefs both arriving at a stew, one with lentils and one with potatoes. Same idea, different ingredients. And surrounding these large browsers were still the giants of the armor world. Glyptodonts with shells thick as concrete walls, often curling beside rivers like parked cars. Their tails sometimes carried bony clubs, swinging weapons heavy enough to crack bone. Imagine yourself trying to walk past one on a trail, and it casually swings that tail. You would step aside quickly. They were herbivores, but even peaceful giants command respect when armored like tanks. Do you notice the repeating theme of protection here? Some animals chose speed, others chose size, and some, like glyptodonts, chose armor. It is the same decision tree people face every day: fight, flee, or shield. On South America's stage, every branch of that choice tree had its champions. Terror birds were the runners, sloths were the heavyweights, glyptodonts the shield bearers. Balance through diversity, though in forms that look twisted to our eyes. Another layer of this world came from the skies, though not the way you expect. While terror birds had lost flight, other birds took the air and grew to incredible spans. Argentavis was one of them, a condor-like giant with wings stretching over 7 meters. It soared above the plains, scanning for carrion, gliding for hours without a single flap. Imagine standing in an open field and seeing a shadow pass overhead, longer than a bus, and realizing it is just one bird. That alone would change the way you walk outside. Argentavis was not a hunter like the terror bird. It was a scavenger and sometimes opportunistic predator. It did not need to sprint. It simply waited for others to kill, or for death to happen naturally. Then it dropped in to claim the reward. If you have ever waited patiently at a buffet line while others rush, and then calmly taken the best slice left behind, you know the strategy. Energy saved is energy earned. Argentavis proved that patience could build wings bigger than any modern bird. The sky was not the only odd frontier. Water, too, became a stage for strangeness. As I mentioned before, some sloths took to the shallows, but they were not alone. Crocodiles adapted into forms half marine, half terrestrial, some even with snouts designed for catching fish in fast currents. The boundaries between land, sea, and air blurred in ways you do not usually expect. That blurring is a hallmark of isolated worlds. where empty roles beg to be filled. Ask yourself this: if you were an early explorer stepping foot here, what would unsettle you most? Would it be the size of the rodents, the sprint of the birds, the wingspan of vultures blocking the sun, or the armored fortresses rolling at your feet? Each answer says something about what unnerves you personally. Some people fear speed, some fear size, some fear silence. On this island continent, you had to face all three daily. And humans did eventually arrive, though far later than these first epochs. When our ancestors finally entered South America, they must have walked in awe, and perhaps in fear. The bones they left behind show they hunted some of these giants. Glyptodont shells turned into shelters. Giant sloth meat carried away. Imagine the first human family stumbling across an armadillo as large as a wagon, then realizing you could live inside its hollowed shell. It was survival mixed with surrealism. Of course, before humans, the land was fully its own kingdom. Let us return to the earlier ages, where only the native animals wrote the rules. Picture a typical day. Morning begins with rodents grazing, the sound of gnawing echoing through grasses. By noon, sloths rise to pull down branches, reshaping forests one clawful at a time. In the afternoon, a terror bird sprints across a clearing, chasing some unlucky mammal that zigzags in panic. Overhead, Argentavis rides the thermals, watching silently for the outcome. And as dusk settles, glyptodonts shuffle slowly to water, their shells glowing faintly in the fading sun. It was a daily rhythm, bizarre to us, but ordinary there. Do you feel how calming that rhythm can be, even with predators lurking? Because nothing rushed beyond its nature. Terror birds ran only when hungry. Sloths moved only when ready. The rest of the time, the land breathed slowly, like a sleeper in a long nap. That may be why listening to these stories at night soothes you, even as the details seem frightening. Life in its own world carried a deep patience. It is worth pausing to ask, why does isolation always build such extremes? The answer hides in numbers. On a mainland, animals compete with dozens of rivals. Cats, dogs, bears, endless waves of interaction. On an island, or an isolated continent like this, the field is thinner. With fewer rivals, each species can expand into spaces it would normally never touch. That freedom encourages strangeness. It is like leaving a classroom with only 3 students. Suddenly one becomes the teacher, another the janitor, another the principal. Roles fill because someone must fill them. The longer isolation lasts, the deeper the transformations. South America was cut off for over 30 million years, long enough for entire families to rise, fall, and reinvent themselves. That time is almost beyond our grasp. Think of one human lifetime, then multiply by hundreds of thousands. Long enough for mountains to erode, rivers to carve valleys, and animals to transform into shapes unrecognizable to their ancestors. When you measure time in that scale, the strangeness feels less like a glitch and more like inevitability. Do you recall how I mentioned earlier that Darwin puzzled over Toxodon? That confusion still echoes today. Fossils from this land often resist simple labels. We keep trying to fit them into known families, yet they stand apart. That is the beauty of South America's experiment. It gave us a reminder that not all life fits neat categories. It humbles us, reminding us that our tidy boxes often fail in the face of raw diversity. Have you ever tried to organize a drawer full of random cables and realized half of them belong to devices you no longer own? That is what paleontology feels like when faced with this continent. The more we uncover, the more we realize how little we understand. Even today, new fossils appear that rewrite pieces of the puzzle. A jawbone here, a shell fragment there, each one adjusting the story slightly. It is like watching a long movie and realizing halfway through that the villain is not who you thought. The island of madness continues to surprise even in silence. And as night falls in our imagined walk, you can almost hear the deep calls of these creatures across the dark. A sloth groaning low as it shifts its weight, a bird shrieking sharp in the distance, the quiet rustle of a glyptodont tail dragging through leaves. Sounds strange, yet oddly soothing, because beneath the absurdity lies order, a quiet rhythm that repeats day after day. By now, you might feel we have met the strangest possible lineup, yet South America's isolation still had more to reveal. Think of the land as a stage where every act tried to outdo the one before. Just when you thought a giant sloth was odd enough, the curtain opened and a saber-toothed marsupial entered. Just when you thought a terror bird was the peak of absurdity, a rodent the size of a bull waddled onto the scene. The show never really ended. It simply kept adding characters until the stage looked crowded with impossible ideas. One of the stranger additions was light upturns. Their name may sound like an academic tongue twister, but their bodies looked like something a child would sketch when told to design a horse without ever seeing one. Long necks, slender legs, odd trunk like snouts. They seemed stitched together from spare parts. Some resembled camels, others looked closer to horses, yet they were neither. Have you ever played with clay and mixed the wrong pieces into one figure, leaving it both funny and oddly workable? That was the Litoptern. Macrauchenia was the most famous of them, wandering in herds across plains and forests alike. They used their short trunks to browse on leaves and to pull at grasses near the ground. That trunk looks silly in reconstructions, yet it was a practical solution. Instead of bending awkwardly, they simply extended their nose down or up. Imagine eating popcorn on a couch. Rather than leaning forward each time, you simply grow a straw on your face. It might look foolish, but it saves effort. Another family was the notungulates, a name that simply means southern hoofed animals. They came in many shapes, from rabbit-sized grazers to lumbering beasts as heavy as rhinos. Some had teeth like rodents, some had bodies like tapirs, and others looked like no living creature at all. It is hard not to smile at the variety, as if nature got bored and decided to spin a wheel of designs. Have you ever doodled during a long meeting and ended up with a page of odd creatures? none quite the same, yet all strangely believable. That is how the fossil record of notungulates feels. Together, Leptopterns and notungulates made South America feel like a mirror world. Elsewhere on Earth you had horses, camels, and rhinos. Here you had parallel forms, built differently but doing the same jobs. This is what scientists call convergent evolution. The same problem leading to the same answer, but by a different route. It is like two cooks each making bread, one with wheat flour, another with rice flour. The result looks similar, though the recipe was entirely separate. What fascinates me most is how normal these animals must have felt to themselves. We look back and call them strange, but to the creatures alive then, they were simply the neighbors. Do you ever stop and realize how odd modern animals would look to someone from the distant past? A giraffe's neck would surely seem as absurd as a Leptoptern's trunk. A platypus would break every expectation of logic. Maybe strangeness is not the exception in evolution, but the rule. And strangeness was not limited to mammals. Reptiles also played their part in the island carnival. Giant turtles such as stupendomes lived in rivers and lakes, with shells nearly 3 meters across. You could have laid down flat on its back and still had space beside you. Imagine trying to tip one over. You would sooner move your house. Their size protected them from nearly all predators, though it also made them slow and heavy. It was the same trade-off many giants faced: invulnerability in exchange for agility. The rivers also held monstrous fish, some related to piranhas but scaled up to terrifying proportions. One genus, Megapiranha, lived millions of years ago and had jaws that could crush bone with ease. Now, think of the small piranha you may have seen in movies, sharp and quick. Then imagine one longer than your arm. Suddenly the riverbanks feel less inviting. Have you ever dipped your toes in a stream and pulled back at the thought of something brushing past? That thought would be far sharper here. And of course, the crocodiles never gave up their claim to the waters. Titanoboa lived earlier in northern South America. After the dinosaurs fell, a snake longer than a school bus, thick enough to crush a crocodile with ease. Though it came earlier than the age we are focusing on, it still shows how South America's isolation encouraged scale and extremes. A snake that long makes you rethink every jungle path. If you have ever felt uneasy seeing a garden hose curled in grass, picture that hose alive, moving, and as wide as your chest. Isolation had another effect beyond size. It encouraged animals to specialize in ways that might look impractical anywhere else. When no rivals exist, a species can stretch into narrow roles that would be impossible in crowded ecosystems. That is why marsupials could grow saber teeth here, or why sloths could swim offshore without competition. It is like a small-town business that survives because no one else sells the same odd item. Once a big company arrives, the shop may close, but until then, it thrives on its niche. This brings us to an important thought. How fragile were these systems really? Balance existed, yes, but it was a balance built on isolation. The moment outside competition arrived, many of these creatures collapsed. Does that make their earlier success less impressive, or more? You could argue both ways. Have you ever built a sandcastle at the beach, tall and elaborate, knowing the tide would take it away. The castle is still real while it stands, even if its time is limited. Pause for a moment and imagine you are lying under the open sky of that ancient land. You hear the sound of grazing herds of Macrauchenia, the distant groan of a giant sloth, and the rhythmic clatter of a glyptodont's tail as it shifts position. Suddenly a shadow passes overhead, Argentavis gliding silently, waiting for the next opportunity. The air smells of plants and dust. The ground trembles faintly with each heavy footfall. Would you feel terror, or would you feel calm, knowing everything was simply living its pattern? Humor finds its place even in such a world. Imagine explaining to someone that your greatest local threat was a giant angry chicken. The sentence alone could earn a laugh, until you saw that beak flash toward you. That is the strange balance of this island story. You chuckle first, and then you realize the joke can crush bones. Life rarely bothers to keep its sense of humor gentle. Another piece of the puzzle lies in the plants. We focus so much on the animals, but the forests and grasslands shaped everything. During the Miocene and Pliocene, grasses spread widely across the continent, giving rise to grazers like Toxodon. Trees still dominated rainforests, feeding sloths and monkeys alike. The Andes Mountains rising in the west created rain shadows, changing habitats eastward into dry plains. Each change forced animals into new paths. It is like shifting the furniture in a room. Suddenly, your usual walking route no longer works, and you bump into tables you never noticed before. The animals adapted in the same way. Monkeys, too, deserve mention. They reached South America likely by rafting from Africa on natural debris. That image alone feels absurd. Tiny primates clinging to floating mats of vegetation, drifting across an ocean until land appeared. Yet once they arrived, they thrived. Today's howler monkeys, capuchins, and tamarins all descend from those early voyagers. Think about the odds. Most rafts would sink or drift aimlessly, but a few lucky ones carried the seeds of entire lineages. Have you ever lost a coin and later found it balanced perfectly in a crack on the floor? Survival often depends on such unlikely accidents. The monkeys joined a caste already filled with marsupials and rodents, creating a lively tree world above the bizarre plains below. From branches you might hear howls echoing, while below a sloth pulled down foliage with claws longer than a man's arm. Different stages stacked vertically, yet woven together into one ecosystem. That layering is what made the continent vibrant despite its isolation. By now you might ask, did dinosaurs linger here after all? The answer is no. By the time South America drifted into its long isolation, the non-avian dinosaurs were already gone. Yet their shadows lived on in the birds and reptiles that carried echoes of their size and ferocity. Terror birds in many ways were a return of the raptor form, only feathered and flightless. Crocodiles like Sebacus carried forward the lineage of ancient reptiles into new hunting grounds. Evolution does not truly erase the past. It recycles it in fresh costumes. Do you find that thought oddly comforting? The creatures may shift and vanish, but pieces of them echo forward. Even the giant turtle shares kinship with today's smaller turtles creeping in ponds. You could watch a turtle in your backyard and know it carries the same basic plan as a beast that once filled an entire river. Continuity runs quietly beneath the chaos. And perhaps that is the deeper lesson from this island continent. Insanity is only a matter of perspective. To us, the lineup of terror birds, giant rodents, armored armadillos, and trunk-faced camels looks bizarre. To them, it was simply Tuesday. Life did not question its own design. It only carried on. Have you ever woken up with bed hair sticking in every direction and only realized later in the mirror how odd you looked? Evolution never had a mirror. It simply went about its business. So as the night deepens in our story, and we keep walking through these strange herds and forests, hold on to that image. A world cut off, reshaping familiar forms into alien ones, balancing itself on the knife edge of isolation. It was a long dream, lasting tens of millions of years. And though it ended, the dream remains etched in stone. Fossils are simply memories, and South America wrote some of the strangest memories of all. The story of this island continent cannot ignore the way time itself changed the stage, because while isolation sculpted the players, the passing ages shaped the backdrop. Mountains rose, rivers shifted, climate swung between wet forests and dry plains. Each change tested the creatures already locked within, and those who adapted survived, while others faded into memory. Imagine living in a house where the walls move every few decades, the furniture reshuffles, and even the ceiling changes height. That was life on South America. The Andes Mountains stand as the clearest monument to these shifts. They rose slowly but steadily along the western edge, lifting the land higher year by year. As they grew taller, they blocked clouds from crossing, drying out vast regions to the east. Once lush forests turned to open grasslands, and animals that had thrived on leaves faced a new challenge. Grazers with strong teeth spread widely, while browsers that depended on soft foliage struggled. Have you ever changed your diet suddenly and felt your body complain? Imagine that on the scale of entire species. Toxodon handled this well because its teeth could grind grasses as easily as softer plants. Glyptodonts too adapted with jaws strong enough to crush tough material, but others fell behind. Some litopterns shrank in number as the plains stretched wider, unable to keep up with the change in available food. It is a reminder that survival often depends less on strength and more on flexibility. The strongest tree may snap in a storm, but the flexible reed bends and lives. While the Andes changed the climate, rivers carved their own influences. Great networks like the Amazon formed, carrying water and life through the heart of the land. In those waters swam creatures like giant turtles, enormous crocodiles, and fish that dwarfed their modern kin. The rivers acted as highways for both nutrients and danger. Animals gathered to drink, but predators waited as well. If you have ever stood at a busy crosswalk, You know how traffic flows both opportunities and risks. For ancient South America, the rivers were that crosswalk. Among the strangest river dwellers were the giant lungfish. These fish could breathe air when water grew scarce, allowing them to survive droughts that killed others. Think of them as walking insurance policies for their own survival. Where ordinary fish perished when ponds dried, lungfish simply gulped air and waited. It is like having a spare battery when everyone else's phone dies. Simple, but life-saving. And while rivers and mountains shifted the land, the sky above hosted its own giants. Argentavis still soared, wings cutting across distances that no predator could match. Its patience allowed it to wait for hours, scanning for carrion. Sometimes it likely followed herds of herbivores, waiting for one to stumble or die. Have you ever noticed how vultures appear out of nowhere when an animal falls on a roadside? Multiply that by 10, and you have Argentavis looming in the distance. Now imagine standing in a plain, watching a herd of Macrauchenia grazing quietly. Suddenly one collapses from exhaustion or age. Within minutes, a shadow sweeps over, Argentavis circling lower, until it lands and spreads wings like black sails. Smaller scavengers scatter because nothing argues with a bird that size. The scene may sound grim, yet it was an essential part of balance. Death fed life, and nothing went to waste. Do you find it curious how we often call such places insane, yet they show incredible efficiency? Each niche was filled, each resource used, each death recycled. Perhaps the insanity is only in our eyes, because we expect animals to fit the molds we know. The molds here were simply different. As time marched on, primates in the trees began to spread wider. Capuchins, howlers, and their relatives multiplied, filling forests with calls and movement. They lived above the strange plains, almost in another dimension. You could say South America was layered like a cake. Predators running on the ground, giants grazing slowly, armored beasts rolling by, and in the canopy small, nimble primates swinging with energy. Each layer busy, yet together forming one great system. Have you ever stood in a crowded apartment building and listened to all the floors at once? Music above, footsteps below, voices drifting sideways. That was this land, only with animals instead of neighbors. The noise must have been a constant symphony of calls, growls, and rustles, yet within the noise, order existed. Marsupials continued to claim their own share of roles. The saber-toothed Thylacosmilus remained one of the strangest. Unlike true cats, its saber teeth grew continuously, anchored deep into the skull. To protect its roots, bony flanges grew along its jaw like shields. This gave its face a boxy appearance, making it look even stranger to modern eyes. But the design worked. Those long blades could slice into prey effectively, even if the bite itself lacked crushing strength. Imagine using scissors that never dulled, always growing sharper, though you had to carry bulky guards around them. That was the trade-off of Thylacosmilus. Odd, but effective. And it shows again that isolation did not require elegance. It only required survival. You might wonder how such predators hunted without constant fights. The truth is, ecosystems spread animals apart in space and time. Terror birds preferred open plains. Thylacosmilus stalked in brush. They overlapped rarely, and when they did, both likely backed away. Injury was too costly. Just as modern lions avoid direct fights with hyenas unless desperate, ancient predators avoided wasting their lives in pointless clashes. The herbivores, meanwhile, continued to expand in diversity. Some rodents filled wetland niches, grazing like hippos. Others spread into drier plains, acting like antelopes, each variation carved from the same family, yet shaped into different forms by habitat. It is like siblings raised in different households, one learning carpentry, another farming, another music. All share blood, yet each adapts to environment. Humans were not yet present in this part of the story, but their arrival loomed in the far future. For now the land belonged fully to its strange players. Each sunrise opened with calls unfamiliar to modern ears. Each sunset closed with silhouettes of creatures long vanished. If you close your eyes, you can almost feel the rhythm. Let me ask you this. If you walked through such a world for 1 hour, would you recognize it as Earth? Or would you think you had stepped into another planet entirely? The truth is, it was Earth, only a version sculpted by separation. And perhaps that is the most dreamlike part of all. Familiar ground, but unfamiliar life. The forests of the Amazon were already forming during these ages, though not in their full modern richness. They held primates, birds, insects, and countless plants, weaving together into dense canopies. Beneath them, giant sloths sometimes wandered in to pull down branches. That image alone feels surreal. Today you picture sloths as small, gentle climbers, yet here they were lumbering across the jungle floor, ripping branches like cranes pulling beams. Do you notice how many times we compare them to machines, forklifts, cranes, bulldozers? That is because their scale demands it. Ordinary animals cannot capture the sense of weight they carried, and yet despite that power, they lived slowly, patiently, eating leaves one mouthful at a time. It is a reminder that strength does not always equal aggression. Sometimes the biggest presence is also the calmest. Even the armored glyptodonts, though equipped with tails that could shatter bone, were mainly peaceful. They grazed slowly, relying on armor as passive protection. But if threatened, they could swing that clubbed tail with devastating force. Fossils show injuries on rivals that match such blows. Imagine being struck by a wrecking ball at waist height. Few predators risked such punishment. And still above all this, the birds. Terror birds dominating the open plains. Argentavis scanning skies. Smaller raptors filling niches between. Birds define the predator world in ways mammals did elsewhere. Do you feel the irony? We tend to see mammals as the rulers of land today, but here, feathers wrote the rules. The more you think about it, the more it challenges your sense of normal. Normal is only what you grew up with. For millions of years, South America's normal was a bird sprinting at top speed, while rodents loomed large and sloths moved like mobile trees. Maybe that is the real lesson of this island, that normal is always temporary. By this point, you may feel the island continent has already shown its wildest tricks. Yet the deeper the fossil record goes, the more surprises appear like forgotten actors entering late into the play. South America had a habit of inventing roles twice over, as if it feared the stage might empty if one player faltered. This redundancy gave the land resilience, though it also filled it with creatures that look strangely duplicated to us today. Consider, for instance, the presence of two kinds of saber-toothed hunters. On the northern continents, you had the famous smilodon, a cat with enormous blades for teeth. But here, South America crafted its own version from marsupial stock, the Thylacosmilus we met earlier. Two unrelated lineages. Same outcome. It is like two different inventors building light bulbs on opposite sides of the world. One with bamboo filament, another with carbon. The glow remains the same. Does it not feel eerie how nature repeats itself when conditions demand? The repeating theme of giant herbivores also stretched into curious shapes. Some of the notungulates carried skulls that looked almost rodent-like, though their bodies were bulky and grazing in style. Others grew snouts shaped like tapirs, blending features we normally keep in separate boxes. If you have ever seen a child mash two different toys together into a hybrid figure, you know the feeling. Strange, yet somehow still functional. One of the oddest among them was Mixotoxodon. This heavy beast looked something like a hippo, though without close relation. Its fossils show thick jaws and teeth shaped for grasses, proving again how much the spread of grasslands influenced life. When you picture a hippo today, you think of water fights and aggression. Yet Mixotoxodon likely lived more like a cow, grazing patiently on tough stems. Imagine walking across a plain and seeing a cow-sized creature with hippo jaws and rodent teeth. It would puzzle you long before it frightened you. But puzzlement was common here. Take the strange ground birds besides the terror birds. There were other giant flightless birds too, some less aggressive but still imposing. They filled browsing roles, pecking at plants, living more like ostriches than predators. In a land with limited large mammals, birds stepped into nearly every size and shape available. Have you ever joined a small team at work and found yourself juggling 5 roles: bookkeeper, cook, janitor, and messenger? That was the bird strategy here. Speaking of multitasking, sloths continued to spread across the land in remarkable forms. Some grew massive, as we know, but others stayed smaller and adapted to different environments. A few even ventured into caves, leaving claw marks on stone walls that still survive today. Imagine entering a cave now and finding scratches taller than you, deep gouges cut by an animal long gone. It sends a chill, though not from fear, more from the echo of time. And then came armadillos of astonishing scale. Glyptodonts remain the most famous, but there were also pampathuras, slightly smaller armored relatives. These creatures carried lighter shells and could dig better, living more like versatile foragers. If glyptodonts were the tanks, pampathuras were the jeeps, both armored, both slow, but serving different niches. It shows again how South America refused to settle for one version of anything. Now, pause a moment and ask yourself, if you dropped into this world unprepared, how long would you last? Would you hide among the trees, hoping the terror birds ignored you? Or would you follow the herds of giant rodents, trusting in safety by numbers? It is an amusing but sobering thought, because while the world feels dreamlike, it was also unforgiving. Animals were not odd for the sake of humor. They were odd because that was what survival demanded. The waterways too deserve another look. The rivers carried more than fish and turtles. They also hosted ancient caimans of enormous scale. Purosaurus was one such titan, stretching over 12 meters long. Its skull alone could crush bone with bite forces that surpass even modern crocodiles. Imagine leaning over a boat edge and seeing jaws rise larger than the boat itself. Few animals dared to drink freely when Purosaurus ruled the waters. And yet, even with such monsters, the rivers remained vital for all. Herds gathered there to drink. Monkeys swung above. Birds swooped low. Danger lurked, but necessity drew everything in. Have you ever entered a crowded marketplace even though you dislike the crush of people because you needed food anyway? That was the riverbank. Risk and survival tied in the same place. As you picture this scene, you may notice how isolation bred not just odd shapes, but a complete reorganization of fear. On other continents, mammals like cats and wolves ruled terror. Here, the fear was feathered or armored or scaled. If you were a grazing herbivore, your nightmares were not lions but birds, not leopards but marsupial saber teeth. The dictionary of fear was rewritten. And still, above it all, the Andes kept rising, pressing life eastward, shaping valleys and pushing forests to retreat. That long mountain chain acted like a slow giant hand rearranging the puzzle pieces. Without those rises, much of the grassland might never have formed, and many grazers would never have evolved. Mountains are silent players in every story. Have you ever considered how a wall in your house can shape where you place furniture? The Andes did the same, only with ecosystems. Now think of how all this felt at the daily scale. Dawn breaking with mist across forests, the cries of monkeys echoing, the rumble of giant sloths waking to feed, noon bringing harsh sun across open plains, herds moving slowly, terror birds pacing the distance, evening cooling into long shadows, Argentavis circling in patient arcs above. Life pulsed in rhythms so steady that even the absurd became routine. Do you find that strangely calming? The idea that even in a world filled with birds taller than men and rodents the size of cattle, calm rhythms still existed. Maybe that is why listening to these stories lulls you, because beneath the absurdity lies the steady heartbeat of life. Humor again sneaks in. Imagine being an early mammal here, scurrying in the grass, and telling your family that the main predator was a bird. If you did not see it yourself, you might laugh it off. Only later, when feathers loomed over you, would the truth erase the laughter. The continent carried a habit of turning comedy into survival lessons. Another odd player was the giant anteater's ancestors. Today, anteaters look eccentric enough with long snouts and sticky tongues. In the past, some grew even larger, living alongside the insect swarms of tropical forests. They may not look threatening, but their claws were sharp and their size intimidating. Picture a dog shaped like a shaggy log, swinging claws longer than your fingers, and you may respect them more quickly. Even the insect eaters here carry drama. The deeper we walk into this land of long isolation, the more we see how survival was never about beauty, but about fitting into the strange puzzle. Every creature looked like a piece carved for a specific slot, no matter how mismatched it seemed to our eyes. The giant rodents filled grazing slots. The sloths became slow bulldozers. The terror birds sharpened into sprinting killers. It was less a zoo and more a living chessboard, where every square had its own unique occupant. One of the more fascinating pieces of this puzzle was the predatory crocodile line called sebasids. Unlike modern crocodiles that lurk in water, sebasids walk tall on land, with long legs beneath them. They were active hunters, not ambush lurkers. Picture a crocodile that runs more like a dog, jaws snapping forward with speed rather than waiting in silence. Have you ever seen someone expect you to sit still, and instead you charge right at them? That was the Sebasid strategy. Sebasids remind us again that South America did not settle for ordinary roles. When mammals elsewhere took over as predators, this land gave reptiles another chance. It is like a company refusing to hire the usual staff and instead promoting someone unexpected from within. The job still got done, just not the way you would have guessed. And for millions of years, it worked. Among herbivores, another curious lineage thrived called Astropotheres. These were large mammals with long bodies, short legs, and in some species long trunks similar to tapirs or small elephants. Their teeth show they were heavy browsers, pulling soft plants from wetlands and forests. They looked ungainly, almost clumsy, but size alone kept them safe. Imagine a blend of a hippo and a tapir stretched oddly long, walking with slow determination. Have you ever dragged a heavy suitcase across uneven ground? Awkward but unstoppable. That was the astropod there. And then there were the litopterns we spoke of earlier, evolving into many forms over time. Some had hooves shaped like modern horses. Others had multiple toes like camels. Their bodies show how adaptable they were, filling roles from runners to grazers to browsers. They were South America's answer to hoofed mammals elsewhere, though designed from a completely different starting line. It is a reminder that nature does not care about ancestry. It cares about outcomes. If running is useful, something will learn to run, whether it is a horse or a litoptern. Do you ever think about how strange it is that form follows function so relentlessly? A fish builds fins, a bird builds wings, an insect builds wings too, all separate but all for flight. South America shows us the same with grazing mammals, each one shaped differently yet converging on the same job. It feels almost like nature is lazy, reusing the same solutions, but with whatever spare parts are lying around. The plains of this land must have been a sight to see. Herds of toxodon and litopterns grazing side by side, giant sloths lumbering past trees, armored glyptodonts rolling slowly along, and scattered through them massive rodents chewing calmly. Above them, Argentavis circled, waiting, while terror birds stalked the edges with patient eyes. If you closed your eyes now, could you picture the sound of it all? Heavy footsteps, chewing, wings pushing air, and somewhere far off, a predator's cry. Now, add to that picture the constant activity of smaller mammals. Armadillos digging burrows, opossums scurrying under cover, monkeys calling from canopies, every layer filled with motion. It must have felt like standing in the middle of a giant clock, every gear turning at its own speed, some fast, some slow, yet all connected. The clock looked bizarre, but the hands kept moving. The strangest part is how many of these lineages lasted for millions of years without interruption. Think of how short human history feels compared to this. We measure time by centuries and millennia. They measured time by ages that spanned longer than our entire species has existed. If you ever feel impatient waiting for a bus, remember that sloths waited out whole mountain ranges rising. Patience was simply part of the landscape. Another predator worth noting was boar hyena, a marsupial carnivore shaped vaguely like a hyena. Though unrelated, it hunted smaller prey and scavenged as well. Its presence shows again how marsupials in South America evolved into almost every niche available. Have you ever noticed how a single tool in your house gets used for everything when nothing else is handy? A butter knife turning into a screwdriver or a shoe becoming a hammer. Marsupials were that tool, adapted into whatever form the continent required. The more you consider these marsupials, the more impressive they seem. While placental mammals elsewhere specialized rapidly, marsupials in South America held their ground for ages. Thylacosmolus ruled as a saber-tooth. Boryena filled the scavenger role. Others acted like badgers or foxes. They remind us that survival is not about being best in theory, but being enough in practice. And for millions of years, they were more than enough. Pause with me here and think about balance again. Terror birds, marsupials, rodents, sloths, all existing together without collapsing the system. Why did it work? Because each one carved its own space, rarely overlapping too much. Predators avoided unnecessary fights. Herbivores spread across different plants, and the land itself provided varied habitats. It was a patchwork quilt, each patch holding its own pattern. To us, it looks like chaos, but up close, it was order stitched together carefully. Do you not find that soothing? The thought that even in madness, patterns emerge. It suggests that what feels insane may simply be order we do not yet recognize. South America whispers that truth across its fossils. The forests, too, deserve a closer gaze. By this point, primates were thriving, spreading into many forms. Howler monkeys called loudly through the canopy. Capuchins cracked nuts with clever hands. Spider monkeys swung with impossible ease. Their world above was as rich as the plains below. If you sat quietly in a clearing, you would hear both layers at once, ground rumbling under heavy steps, trees shaking with nimble leaps. Two worlds coexisting without ever fully merging, and yet those worlds touched often. Fallen fruit drew rodents and sloths from below. Predators stalked near trees hoping something clumsy fell. Birds of prey swooped between layers hunting monkeys or smaller mammals. No wall truly separated air, land, and canopy, all blended in a continuous cycle. It was like watching 3 floors of a building with open staircases, neighbors wandering freely up and down. Another overlooked player in these forests were giant insects. Fossils suggest dragonflies and beetles of impressive size, though not as large as those from earlier ages of Earth. Still, in thick, humid forests, insect swarms must have filled the air. Anteaters and armadillos thrived on them, digging into nests and pulling out meals with sticky tongues. Have you ever opened a jar of sugar and watched ants pour in? Now scale that up until entire mounds boiled with motion. It would have been both fascinating and unnerving to witness. Life here carried a raw physicality that feels almost alien. Teeth, claws, armor, trunks, wings, every adaptation visible, exaggerated, undeniable. Nothing about these creatures was subtle. Do you notice how few of them relied on stealth or camouflage? Most were simply too big or too armored to hide. Their survival was not about avoiding notice, but about demanding respect. You could not ignore a glyptodont. You could not overlook a terror bird. They insisted on being seen. Imagine walking across a clearing and realizing every creature around you was oversized or oddly shaped. No deer slipping quietly away. No wolves hiding in brush. Instead, a bird staring at you openly. A sloth moving like a crane beside a tree. A rodent chewing loudly without fear. The land felt honest in its strangeness. Everything visible. Everything unapologetic. And perhaps that is why we find it both amusing and unsettling today. Because our modern world feels hidden and quick, filled with subtle predators and cautious prey. This world was bold, obvious, blunt. And in that bluntness lies its charm. Now consider the role of extinction slowly ticking away in the background. For millions of years, this system thrived, but isolation made it vulnerable. The moment new players arrived from the north, the system wavered. Cats, dogs, bears, true hoofed mammals, they entered and competed directly. Many of the old lineages collapsed. Terror birds dwindled. Marsupial predators faded. Giant rodents shrank. The strange dream began to end. But in the time before that contact, South America was complete unto itself. A world that did not need the rest of Earth to justify its rules. It thrived alone, balanced alone, and became unforgettable in its oddity. When we move further into this long dream of isolation, the sense of strangeness deepens into familiarity. The longer you imagine yourself walking among these creatures, the less odd they feel, and the more normal they become in their own rhythm. A terror bird no longer shocks you. It simply reminds you to keep distance. A glyptodont rolling slowly past looks less like a monster and more like a neighbor with thick armor who minds his own business. This is how ecosystems tame even the strangest designs. they fold them into routine. Among the most peculiar routines were the grazing herds of note ungulates. Their skulls carried unusual shapes, some flat like rodents, others with extended snouts like tapirs. They grazed side by side with Toxodon, filling landscapes with constant chewing. If you ever walked past a field of cows and heard the unbroken sound of grinding jaws, imagine that doubled or tripled in size and variety. It was not silence here, but the steady music of teeth against plant. Some of these notungulates grew horns. Others carried strange ridges along their skulls. Their diversity almost mocked the idea of a single design. Each family tried a different version, and if it worked, it stayed. This variety feels familiar when you think about modern cars. Some shaped like boxes, some sleek like arrows, all still moving on 4 wheels. The continent simply preferred endless prototypes. Do you notice yet how many of these creatures looked mismatched? A hippo body with rodent teeth, a camel neck with a trunked nose, a bird body with a predator's skull. To us, they seem like errors, but to the land, they were successes. Evolution does not mark papers with red pens. It only checks if the design survives long enough to reproduce. Oddity was no obstacle. The predators among marsupials continued to surprise too. Borhyina stalked across plains, built like a dog but from entirely separate ancestry. Its bones show strong jaws, good for crushing and tearing. It filled roles that wolves and hyenas filled elsewhere, but here it was alone. Have you ever found yourself forced to do a job outside your training, and yet somehow made it work? That was Borhyina, succeeding because no one else was available. The forests offered yet another layer of odd life. Armadillos dug tunnels in numbers, creating networks underground. Some species grew larger and heavier, others smaller and nimble. Their digging shaped the soil, turning over nutrients and making space for plants. In many ways, they acted like unseen gardeners, cultivating the land without knowing it. It is funny how often the smallest or quietest animals do the most shaping. Termites and worms do it today, and armadillos did it then. Above ground, monkeys filled trees with constant sound. Howlers roared deep across canopies, their voices carrying for miles. Spider monkeys swung through branches like living ropes, their tails gripping as firmly as hands. Capuchins broke nuts with stones and sticks, among the first hints of tool use in this continent. Imagine sitting on a fallen log and watching a monkey crack open a nut with a rock, then share it with its group. That moment would feel oddly human. A mirror held up from another branch of the tree of life, and still higher, birds filled skies with their own spectrum. Argentavis soared silently. Vultures circled smaller carcasses. Parrots squawked in bright flashes. It was a vertical world, stacked from underground burrows to cloud-high flights. No layer unused, no space wasted. It makes you wonder how silence ever existed here, when every level of air, earth, and tree was busy with movement. Pause for a second and think of how overwhelming that soundscape might have felt. No cars, no machines, but constant animal life, the low chewing of grazers, the thundering sprint of predators, the deep call of sloths, the piercing cries of birds. Have you ever sat in a crowded cafe where every voice mixes, yet somehow it becomes background music? That was this land, noisy, but calming once you adjusted. The amphibians too deserve a moment. Giant frogs once thrived here, such as Beelzebufo in earlier ages closer to Madagascar, but echoed in this region's own large forms. Imagine a frog the size of a beach ball, jaws wide enough to swallow small mammals. Amphibians usually slip under our notice, but when scaled up, they demand respect. Think of the last time you startled at a small frog hopping near your foot, now double its size until it could grab your foot entirely. That is how startling ancient amphibians could be. Even insects grew bold in this isolation. Some beetles reached lengths rivaling a human hand, while dragonflies darted across rivers with wings shimmering in sunlight. Their presence may not frighten like terror birds, but they added to the texture of this living quilt, because no detail in the system was empty. Every space was filled, even the smallest corners. That is what made the land feel complete. The plants responded to these pressures in their own ways. Grasses spread wide after the Andes rose. Forests retreated and advanced with climate cycles. Flowering plants evolved thicker defenses, thorns and toxins, forcing herbivores to adapt in return. It was an arms race, slow but steady. If you have ever had a neighbor who locks their trash bin, only for raccoons to learn the trick of opening it anyway, you know the cycle. Plants and animals never really finish their contest. Do you ever find yourself surprised at how much plants dictate animal life? We focus on predators, yet the real story begins with leaves and stems. When forests shrank, sloths had to wander further. When grasses spread, grazing teeth became essential. When toxins increased, only those who could stomach them survived. The quiet greenery beneath it all shaped the drama more than the claws above. By now you may be asking, did these creatures interact peacefully or constantly clash? The answer is both. Peace filled most hours, with grazing herds ignoring each other and sloths moving slowly through trees. Yet every so often, a terror bird sprinted, a marsupial saber struck, or a crocodile lunged from water. The violence was brief but decisive. It is like storms on a calm sea, hours of peace broken by sudden force, and then the calm resumed. The strangest part is how quickly calm returns after violence in nature. A herd may scatter when one member is caught, but within minutes they settle again. Life carries on as though nothing happened. Do you not find that eerie? The way survival folds even death into routine. Perhaps that is why we find these stories both unsettling and soothing. They show us a world where even terror had its place, and calm followed close behind. Among the strangest shapes of the late Miocene were the macrauchonids, long-necked mammals with trunk-like noses. They grazed in groups, their long faces sweeping side to side like flexible vacuums, Fossils suggest they were common and successful, spread across wide ranges. To us, they look comical, almost like mistakes, yet their bones show endurance and adaptation. Sometimes what looks silly hides deep resilience. Have you ever seen a clumsy-looking tool become your favorite because it simply works? That was macrauchonids. The longer the island continent remained sealed off, the deeper its experiment with life became. Each lineage stretched further into oddity, filling niches that elsewhere belonged to completely different families. The result was a continent that looked familiar at first glance, yet every step revealed another reminder that you were far from the ordinary. Take, for example, the armored glyptodonts once more. Their shells were not simple plates like modern armadillos, but domes fused into thick carapaces as solid as stone. Some species even evolved tails tipped with heavy clubs, weapons that could swing with bone-shattering force. Fossil evidence shows cracks in rival shells matching such blows. Imagine standing near two armored giants as they swung at each other, the sound like stone striking stone. Have you ever tapped two coconuts together and felt the hollow thud? Now stretch that until it could echo across a field. That was the clash of glyptodonts. Their peaceful grazing most of the time makes the contrast even sharper. Hours spent nibbling slowly on grass, only to explode into violent contests when challenged. It shows again how even gentle giants carry hidden weapons. Do you not find that duality strange? That peace and destruction can exist inside the same body, waiting only for circumstance. Alongside them wandered the giant ground sloths, Megatherium being the largest and most famous. They reached sizes taller than elephants when standing upright, their claws long as swords. Despite their bulk, they moved slowly, methodically, tearing branches from trees with deliberate force. Their skeletons suggest they could rear back on hind legs, pulling entire trunks down with weight alone. Picture a crane tipping a telephone pole. That was the sloth at work. And yet these massive beings were leaf eaters, harmless in intent, though dangerous if provoked. Fossils even suggest humans later hunted them, perhaps using fire and teamwork to overcome their strength. But for now, in their age of dominance, they walked like shaggy mountains across plains and forests. The patience in their stride must have been hypnotic. Above all this continued the reign of birds. Terror birds still stalked the grasslands, delivering quick death with sharp beaks. Argentavis still sailed the skies, larger than any modern flyer. Parrots filled forests with shrill color. Vultures circled waiting for their moments. It was as if feathers ruled both ground and air, leaving mammals to fill the in-between roles. Have you noticed how hard it is to picture a world where birds held dominance? Today, we swat at pigeons. Yet here, pigeons' distant cousins could have ended your life in seconds. Among smaller predators lurked marsupial carnivores like Prothylacinus and boar hyena, blending features we usually expect from dogs and cats. Their bones reveal runners and stalkers, quick on their feet, sharp in their jaws. They were the medium-sized hunters, filling gaps between the giants. Think of them as the jackals and foxes of their time, only with pouches for their young. Have you ever seen how small predators today live in the shadow of lions, yet survive by cleverness? That was their path. The rivers remained as much a stage as the land. torso still dominated waterways, its skull massive enough to crush glyptodonts if they strayed too close. Smaller caimans filled other niches, hunting fish or ambushing mammals at edges. Fish themselves included titanic species, lungfish capable of withstanding drought, catfish longer than a person, piranha ancestors with jaws like steel traps. The water was not safety, but another layer of risk. If you imagine standing at a riverbank here, would you dare to step in? The air might be hot, your throat dry, yet each ripple could hide jaws wider than your shoulders. Have you ever second-guessed dipping a toe into a lake when you could not see the bottom? That hesitation would grow into certainty here. Best to drink quickly and step back. And then there was the sky at night, clearer than modern skies before pollution and city glow. Stars covering the heavens, the Milky Way stretching like a pale ribbon. Animals below continued their rhythms, sloths shifting slowly, rodents grazing, predators pacing shadows. Even in darkness, the continent pulsed with life, perhaps more so, for terror birds could strike even in twilight. The land never slept completely. Do you not find it soothing, though? The thought of constant background life. Today, silence often feels heavy. Yet in this world, silence was rare. Always a call, a rustle, a wing beat. It is strange how noise can become comfort. Like rain on a roof, steady and endless. The Andes continued shaping everything. Their rise funneled winds and rains, carved valleys and basins, and forced migrations across changing lands. As they rose, they created corridors and blockades alike. Creatures spread along their slopes, adapted to cooler heights, or were pushed east into spreading plains. Mountains are slow sculptors, yet they never stop. Over millions of years, they rewrote entire maps. The forests east of the Andes became cradles of diversity. Monkeys multiplied into dozens of species. Insects thrived. Plants tangled into impossible density. In these forests, predators from outside the continent had not yet entered, so monkeys lived without leopards or tigers. Their main threats were eagles and snakes, dangers that shaped their agility. Have you ever noticed how animals become acrobats when danger comes from above instead of below? That was the lesson of South American forests. In contrast, the plains carried danger on two legs. Terror birds watched from tall grass, waiting for motion. Their speed gave them advantage over almost anything smaller. Fossil trackways even suggest sprints and chases preserved in stone. Imagine running for your life, and the only prints left behind tell the story forever. The fear etched into ground itself. Among the grazers, Toxodon remained widespread, their bodies heavy, their teeth broad, their range wide across wetlands. They were among the most successful generalists, able to survive in many environments. They remind us that often it is not the strangest or fiercest that thrives longest, but the flexible. Have you ever known someone who was never the best at any one thing, but always good enough to get by? That was Toxodon. And still, even the mighty had limits. Each creature's survival depended on balance. Remove one predator, prey might overgraze. Remove one grazer, plants might overgrow and starve others. Ecosystems are fragile tapestries. Pull one thread and the design shifts. South America's tapestry was bold and unusual, yet as delicate as any. Do you feel the quiet irony that what looks strongest can also be most vulnerable? The very isolation that allowed such giants to thrive also made them unprepared for future arrivals. They lived in a long dream, but dreams eventually end. The long dream of South America had endured for ages beyond human comprehension. Millions upon millions of years where the continent lived in its own sealed silence. The animals there had been sculpted by nothing but isolation, and their lives had followed rules written only within their borders. But dreams cannot last forever, and the ocean itself began to stir with change. Slowly, inch by inch, the Isthmus of Panama rose from the sea. It was not sudden, not a single earthquake or a single eruption. It was a slow lifting of stone, plates pushing, earth folding, seas retreating. And as that narrow strip connected north to south, the gates opened for the first time in tens of millions of years. The Great American Interchange had begun. Think of how a single hallway connecting two houses allows every person from both sides to wander freely. At first it feels exciting, then it feels crowded, then it feels overwhelming. That was exactly what happened here. A narrow bridge, only a few miles wide, changed the entire destiny of two continents. From the north came a procession of predators first, cats with long fangs, their jaws strong enough to break bone, dogs with endurance, built for chasing prey over long distances, bears with massive strength, capable of overpowering almost anything smaller. They walked down the bridge as if summoned by the scent of untouched lands. Imagine standing at the southern edge and watching shadow after shadow approach from the horizon, each one a shape never before seen by the native creatures. South America's predators were caught unprepared. Terror birds had ruled as sprinters, striking with speed and hammer like skulls. But they had never faced cats that could leap and grapple, holding prey down with claws and suffocating with bites. A terror bird relied on running and striking, but a jaguar could climb, pounce, and hold. Have you ever tried to fight a problem with one tool, only to find the opponent had 5 tools at once? That was the terror bird's disadvantage. Thylacosmolus, the marsupial saber, had its strange boxy face and long teeth. It had done well for ages, but against placental saber-toothed cats, it faltered. Its bite force was weak compared to Smilodon, its teeth longer but more fragile. In a contest between the two, the native predator was outmatched. It is like watching a craftsman with a delicate scalpel face off against a butcher with a cleaver, both sharp, but one far more durable. Borhyina, The marsupial scavenger shaped like a hyena also collapsed under the new competition. True canids, wolves and foxes and dogs, poured south with energy and endurance. They hunted in packs, coordinated with each other, something Boryina never mastered. Imagine a lone shopkeeper facing a chain of supermarkets opening overnight. The outcome was inevitable. Even the rivers changed with the invasion. North American bears like the short-faced bear pushed into new territories, sometimes scavenging at riverbanks where Purosaurus and other crocodiles had once held dominance. The balance of danger tilted. The old reptilian lords still lurked, but new rivals claimed space too. Every layer of the ecosystem felt the intrusion. Yet it was not only a story of loss. Some South American travelers crossed the bridge northward and succeeded. Giant ground sloths ambled slowly north, reaching as far as present-day Alaska. Their bones litter caves across the continent, proof of their long wanderings. Glyptodonts rolled upward too, their armored domes surprising new predators unfamiliar with such defenses. Armadillos crossed and spread, smaller forms thriving where their larger cousins might fail. Opossums scurried northward, proving their ability to survive almost anywhere. Even capybaras spread north into wetlands. The bridge worked both ways. Still, the weight of northern arrivals pressed hardest on the south. Horses crossed down, hooves pounding plains that had once belonged to light upturns. They grazed faster, reproduced faster, and their efficiency pushed natives aside. Deer, too, moved south, sleek and nimble, blending into forests and plains alike. Camels wandered down, competing directly with Macrauchenia. The native lineages, odd-shaped and long isolated, began to shrink. Picture the scene of overlap, a plain where horses and litopterns grazed together, side by side but not equals. One lineage tuned by endless competition, the other softened by isolation. In time, the northern horses took more and more ground, until the litopterns dwindled, or a forest edge where jaguars padded silently, and terror birds still lurked in tall grass. Two predators circling the same prey, yet only one able to climb trees, swim rivers, and strike in darkness. Slowly the birds faded. Do you not feel a strange sadness at this thought? The old madness giving way to ordinary faces, the bizarre shapes collapsing under the weight of more efficient designs. It is like watching a carnival fade into a regular street. Once color and noise filled the air, now only ordinary shops remain. And yet, for thousands of years, the mix must have been surreal. Imagine standing at dusk, seeing a glyptodont grazing while a horse gallops past. A jaguar crouches low, but across the clearing a terror bird also waits. Two worlds pressed into one scene. It must have felt like a dream folding into another dream, one layered over the other. The Andes still rose higher, watching without concern. The rivers still cut valleys, feeding forests and plains alike. The backdrop endured while the cast changed. Have you ever seen a play performed with different actors? Same stage, same lines, but new voices changing the mood entirely. That was South America after the bridge. Yet not every old family died quickly. Toxodon lingered for ages, still chewing patiently at wetlands. Ground sloths survived until humans arrived, hunted and burned into extinction. Some terror birds held on in corners, though their power waned. Glyptodonts endured too, until human hunters found their shells useful as shelters and targets. The dream did not vanish in a single breath. It faded step by step. Imagine a night near the end of this overlap. The stars blaze clear above. A herd of horses grazes on one side of a river. On the other, a group of toxodons still chew. A jaguar drinks quietly, while not far off, a terror bird calls into the dark. The moment feels balanced, yet fragile. The silence between calls carries the weight of change. Do you not wonder what it would have felt like to be one of the last terror birds? To hear sounds of new predators, to see prey vanish faster each year. Perhaps they felt confusion, or perhaps only hunger. We cannot know, but the bones suggest dwindling numbers, fewer prints, fewer nests, a long dynasty dissolving quietly. The Great American Interchange shows us a truth that is both beautiful and cruel. Isolation builds wonders, but connection rewrites them. The bridge was both miracle and doom. A single strip of land changed entire continents, and with it erased entire worlds. It reminds us how fragile uniqueness is. One new path can end an ancient dream. Pause and imagine the bridge itself, stretching across the sea, narrow but firm. On one side stand jaguars and horses waiting to step forward. On the other side stand sloths and armadillos preparing their journey north. The tide laps quietly below, unaware of the drama above. Each footstep across carries history with it. Each paw and hoof rewrites destinies. The air must have carried the scent of mingling worlds. The interchange was not instant. It unfolded across hundreds of thousands of years. Slowly, steadily, animals moved, spread, and replaced. Time itself acted like a slow eraser, fading old lines, sketching new ones. By the end, South America no longer looked like the isolated island of madness. It looked more like every other continent, its oddities buried in stone. Yet even now, traces remain. The opossum in your backyard, the armadillo on a roadside, the capybara lounging in rivers. Each is a whisper from the old dream. Each carries DNA shaped by millions of years of isolation. When you look at them closely, you see not just an animal, but an echo of a lost world. By the time the Great American Interchange had begun reshaping the land, South America stood at a crossroads of history. For millions of years, it had been a sealed chamber of experimentation, where terror birds ruled, glyptodonts grazed, sloths towered, and odd ungulates filled plains. But with the bridge open, the newcomers pressed steadily southward. And each year the balance shifted further. Picture the first jaguars moving down from the north, sleek, powerful, silent, their paws pressed into soils that had never felt such predators before. The native prey animals did not yet know these shapes. Toxodon might watch them with dull eyes, unaware of the danger. Leptoptern herds might stand their ground too long, never taught to flee from cats. In those first hunts, confusion must have reigned. Imagine a flock of birds that has never seen a hawk, standing still until it is too late. That was the shock of introduction. Dogs followed close behind. Wolves and fox-like canids swept into open spaces, hunting in groups and testing prey relentlessly. Their endurance gave them reach over wide plains. Their packs gave them power over larger targets. Borhiana could not compete. A solitary marsupial scavenger had little chance against coordinated hunters with speed and stamina. Have you ever tried to play a team sport alone against a squad of practiced players? The outcome is predictable. Bears too arrived, their heavy forms claiming forests and mountains. Short-faced bears in particular grew massive, towering over most other predators. Their sheer presence reshaped hierarchies. Terror birds that once strode confidently now risked facing jaws and claws stronger than their own. Do you not find it striking that an animal which once commanded fear suddenly became cautious? Power is always relative, and relativity had shifted. The herbivores faced new rivals as well. Horses thundered across plains, their hooves carving patterns through grasses. Deer darted swiftly through forests, nimble in ways that Toxodon could never match. Camels pushed into dry lands, competing directly with Macrauchenia. Within a few thousand years, the native ungulates began to decline. Some hung on in pockets. Others faded entirely. Imagine standing on a hillside during this time. On one side, you see Toxodon and Macrauchenia grazing as always. On the other, you see horses moving in herds, deer flicking tails, camels bending for dry shrubs. The overlap must have felt surreal. It was as if two paintings had been laid on top of each other, colors blending until neither picture looked quite the same. Yet some natives did cross northward with success. Ground sloths ambled slowly into new worlds, reaching deserts and plains they had never seen. Armadillos spread widely, their armor baffling new predators unused to such defenses. Opossums proved endlessly adaptable, thriving wherever they wandered. Even glyptodonts rolled upward, their domes catching sunlight on foreign grasslands. These travelers carried the strangeness of the South into northern lands, though even they would eventually face decline. Do you feel how migration works like a tide, flowing both ways, yet with different strengths? The North pushed harder than the South, its predators sharper, its grazers faster. The tide carried more force downward, and like sandcastles meeting waves, the southern oddities began to wash away. Still, for centuries, perhaps for millennia, the overlap was real. Terror birds still ran across open spaces, even as jaguars stalked nearby. Glyptodonts still grazed heavily, even as horses began to nibble beside them. Macrauchenia still stretched trunks for leaves, even as camels bent necks nearby. It must have been a world layered in contradiction. At night, those contradictions became even sharper. Picture stars blazing across an open sky, while on the ground old and new predators patrolled together. A terror bird calls sharp into the dark, but a jaguar answers with a low growl. A boar hyena scavenges quietly, while a wolf pack pads close by. For any prey animal, the danger doubled. For the land itself, the identity blurred. Do you not think the land must have felt crowded after ages of isolation? The newcomers brought not only their bodies but their diseases, their parasites, their habits. Ecosystems collided at every level. It was not just predator against predator. It was flea against flea, microbe against microbe. The invisible battles were just as decisive as the visible ones. The Andes still towered indifferently. Forests still rustled with monkeys and birds. Rivers still surged with crocodiles and fish. But the caste of mammals shifted more with every passing age. Nautungulates dwindled, litopterns weakened, marsupial carnivores vanished. Their bones sank quietly into soil, leaving the stage to the newcomers. Yet some ghosts lingered stubbornly. Toxodon continued long into this interchange, grazing calmly even as deer and horses multiplied. Ground sloths persisted with slow patience, ignoring newcomers as long as forests offered branches. Glyptodonts carried their armor until very late, surviving against predators by sheer resilience. Imagine a stubborn shop that refuses to close even when chain stores line the street. That was these survivors. The more you dwell on this overlap, the more dreamlike it becomes. The image of a jaguar crouched beside a terror bird, both eyeing the same prey, or a horse grazing across from a toxodon, each chewing grass in rhythm, or a wolf sniffing curiously at a glyptodont, puzzled by its unyielding dome. Such meetings must have happened countless times, though we can only imagine them now. Humor sneaks in too. Picture a wolf pack circling a glyptodont, biting at its shell, only to hear the dull thuds of futility. You can almost see the wolves stepping back in frustration, wondering why their new southern prey came encased in a portable fortress. Survival sometimes writes jokes into its scripts, but the laughter fades because we know how the story leaned. The natives lost ground steadily. Their odd forms could not keep pace with predators and grazers sharpened by endless competition elsewhere. The island dream was not built for outside contests. Still, traces of victory belong to the South as well. The opossum thrives across 2 continents today. Armadillos shuffle roadsides as common as rabbits in some regions. Capybaras lounge by rivers, icons of calm survival. Even llamas and alpacas, domesticated descendants of camel-like stock, trace back to these old lineages. Echoes remain even as most voices have fallen silent. Imagine again the land during twilight of this interchange. A herd of deer grazes under fading light. Nearby, a macrauchenia lingers still, trunk sweeping quietly across low plants. A jaguar slinks close, while not far away a terror bird raises its head. Above, Argentavis circles faintly, though fewer than before. The air holds tension, but also resignation. The balance tilts slowly, unhurried, unstoppable. Do you not feel the melancholy woven here? The sense of an old song fading into another tune. South America's dream was not erased instantly, but softened, replaced line by line until only echoes remained. Change rarely strikes like lightning. More often it arrives like waves, small but relentless. By the time humans finally stepped onto the southern continent, the long dream had already begun to fade. The great American interchange had carried in cats and dogs and deer and horses, and many of the ancient natives were struggling to hold ground. Yet even weakened, South America still looked like no other place on Earth. The shadows of its odd giants lingered, and the stage still carried echoes of madness. Picture the first human hunters arriving. Their eyes widened at sights they had never known. A ground sloth standing tall as a house, claws swinging slowly but with terrifying reach. A glyptodont grazing quietly, its shell like a stone wall, its tail heavy enough to shatter bones. A capybara the size of a small pig slipping into rivers with little fear. And somewhere in the distance, the deep call of a terror bird still carried faintly in the dusk. Have you ever wondered what it felt like to see such animals alive? Not as fossils or reconstructions, but breathing, shifting, watching you back to our ancestors. This was not history. It was daily life. They faced choices every hour, hunt or hide, chase or run, and slowly they began to tip the scales. Humans were clever in ways no predator before had been. They used fire, they worked in groups, they carried weapons beyond tooth and claw. A sloth could fight one attacker, but not a dozen armed with spears. A glyptodont shell could resist a jaguar's bite, but fire and patience could drive it into traps. Even the mighty terror bird had no answer for humans who struck from afar with stones and arrows. Intelligence had joined the game, and intelligence tilted the rules. Do you not feel a strange sadness here? For millions of years, the island of madness had balanced itself without us. Then, within a brief span of human time, many of its giants were gone. The ground sloths fell, the glyptodonts vanished, the terror birds disappeared entirely. It is as if the curtain dropped too quickly on a play that had run for eons. And yet, not all was lost. Some lineages endured beside us. Armadillos still dig quietly through soil, scaled down but carrying the same armored design. Opossums shuffle through backyards, survivors of a world that once filled forests with their kin. Capybaras sit calmly by rivers. The largest rodents left, but still whispers of larger cousins. Anteaters wander grasslands, their long snouts unchanged across millions of years. The dream did not vanish fully. It softened into shadows that remain with us. Imagine sitting by a modern riverbank in South America today. You see capybaras lounging, caimans slipping into water, armadillos digging at the edge. None seem threatening. None carry the strangeness of giants. Yet if you close your eyes, you can almost hear echoes of what came before. the heavy footfalls of sloths, the scraping of glyptodont tails, the thunder of a terror bird sprinting unseen. The past is never silent. Do you not find comfort in that thought? That every living animal around us carries whispers of lost worlds. Even ordinary pigeons carry the echo of dinosaurs. Even tiny armadillos carry the echo of armored fortresses. Life always remembers, even when we forget. The Andes still stand as guardians, older than our species, rising high above the lands where these dramas unfolded. They watched terror birds run. They watched horses arrive. They watched humans light fires. They remind us that all life is temporary, but the land endures longer. Mountains crumble slowly, but even their silence tells us that nothing lasts forever. And perhaps that is why the story of South America touches us so deeply. It is not only a tale of bizarre animals and forgotten predators. It is a lesson in impermanence. The strangest designs thrived for ages, then vanished. The most ordinary newcomers arrived and still shifted everything. Now humans walk where sloths once towered, and soon, perhaps even we will be memories in stone. Have you ever walked through a museum and stared at the bones of something long gone and felt both wonder and grief? That is the feeling this continent leaves us with. Wonder for what existed, grief for what was lost, but also humility, because we too are just temporary players. So let us pause one last time and picture the island when it was still whole in its madness. A plain where rodents the size of cattle grazed calmly. A forest where sloths pulled down trees like cranes tearing beams. A river where Purosaurus waited in silence for something foolish enough to drink. A sky where Argentavis drifted wide as a sail across endless blue. And across it all, terror birds running, swift and merciless, their shadows stretching across grass. This was the island where evolution went insane, and yet in its insanity it found balance. It was a world where the absurd became ordinary, and the ordinary became rare. It was proof that life can take any shape, as long as it works. It was a reminder that survival has no script, only improvisation. And though the dream has ended, its echoes remain with us. In every armadillo crossing a road, in every opossum scurrying under moonlight, in every capybara lounging by water, tiny survivors of a world once filled with giants. Proof that even madness leaves descendants. So tonight, as you close your eyes, let your mind wander across that lost land. Hear the sloth groan low in the distance. Feel the shadow of Argentavis sweep above. Listen to the scrape of a glyptodont tail, the sudden sprint of a terror bird, the quiet chewing of toxodon in twilight. Drift through the dream as if you were there, walking slowly, calmly, across a continent where the rules of life bent into strange shapes. And as you drift further into rest, remember this: evolution never cared about sense or sanity. It only cared about possibility. And sometimes, possibility looks insane to us. But to the creatures that lived it, it was home.